I'm going to talk to you about the Coffs Agrifood Living Lab, which is the initiative that we're running down there at the moment in Coffs Harbour. So it's alongside my colleague Dr. Oz, who couldn't be here today, but I'll talk through the work that we've been doing together. So this really started back in 2020 to 2021. We had a one-year project where we were tasked with understanding the food innovation ecosystem in Coffs Harbour. So in particular, we wanted to understand what the capacity was like. Is there room for growth? What are some of those barriers and so on, particularly in the space of value addition in food? So we spoke to a lot of local stakeholders, a lot of farmers, as well as manufacturers, retailers, and so on, to try to understand what could help them essentially. So what we found was that value-add innovation is very important. It's something that they want to expand on, and there's plenty of ideas there. A lot of people, really had some great things that they were doing on a small scale, and they sort of wanted to figure out how can we upscale this. And a big part of that as well was around sustainability and how to utilize and minimize waste as well. So basically what we found in this project, in a very tight nutshell, because it is a very long report, is that we needed more connection, collaboration, infrastructure to facilitate some of this, and more training as well. So really what we found was all of these people we spoke to and surveyed as well really wanted to work together, really wanted to create new things. They just sort of thought, well, no one else really wants to talk with us. We don't really know how to connect with these people. And so that's really what we wanted to do with this project. Among four key recommendations that we made, one of them was around the development of a precinct to bring together not just facilities for manufacturing, but also to provide some of those connections, right? So that people could work together alongside education here to try to align some of those skills, as well as collaborating with other like-minded stakeholders in the region, and being able to facilitate some of those barriers we found around logistics and movement of product in and out of Coffs Harbour. And so that project in 2021 has now led us to October of 2023, where we launched this Coffs Agrifood Living Lab to address those four recommendations that we identified in this scoping project. We chose a living lab. So living labs have been quite successful overseas, in Europe especially. There are some in Australia as well. We believe to be the first agri-food-focused living lab in Australia. Plenty of track record, particularly in Europe, but also Canada, of agri-food living labs. But basically, they've worked on things from health to design and city planning and things like that also. So the key part of this, and I love that James described us as a startup cluster as well, because we really see what we're doing with Call as a bit of a startup also. So a lot of these living labs overseas typically have millions of dollars of funding and so on. So we're really doing a sort of a lean startup of a living lab. And the key elements here is to bring together people from the quadruple helix, right? So essentially just academia, government, industry, and the targeted users for things that we are creating, whether it's products or services or clusters. So what's important is that obviously academia will be involved, not just Oz and I, but we bring together, for example, as we work on this precinct, people who have expertise in supply chain, particularly in agri-food. We have people from industry come in as well, from the local industry, to tell us, these are the problems that we're having. How do we solve these problems, and really working together with that. Government obviously can provide that long-term perspective and insight in terms of regulatory role, what's possible, sometimes where the funding might come from and things like that. And obviously the users, which in the case of the precinct, in fact, coalesces with most of these other members here as well. So these are the four initiatives that came out of Project One that I mentioned before. We also have one here about waste to value. I don't really have a huge amount of time to cover all of these, but I'll get back to those in a bit as well. But our very first initiative that we started running at the start of this year was that design of that precinct model. And so, Paul, in practice, how these sessions work, we've had 3 of them so far, and I'll go through some details of that shortly. We're very focused on active user involvement, as well as co-creation, right? So Oz and I are facilitators, or orchestrators is the word that's on the slide here, but we really facilitate those discussions, bring people together, and then synthesize all of that into something meaningful to give some direction to some of these initiatives. And so this multi-method approach as well, I will describe in a couple of slides, but we use the design thinking methodology and a lot of different tools in that in toolbox for that. So the very beginning of this was a launch that we held in October last year. I believe we had about 70 or 80 people there. I hope I'm not overestimating that, but very good turnout from local stakeholders who wanted to understand, what is happening and how they can be involved. And so that was really good. We got some good sign-ups for our very first session. In session 1, so this is the Living Lab method that I mentioned, the design thinking methodology. There are actually a couple more steps beyond this, but for this first project where we're producing a business case, we're not actually, as far as these 2 years producing a built precinct. So in session 1, we really focused on this problem space, trying to understand who are all of the stakeholders that are affected by this, and then for each of those stakeholders, what are those opportunities and challenges that we can address through a precinct design? So rather than coming in and saying, what are all the fantastic things that we can put into a facility and bring everybody into, we first wanted to make sure that we were actually addressing those issues and designing meaningful solutions to those. Our second session then is that ideation phase. So now that we understand the problem, let's start to generate some ideas. And then out of session 2, we designed a very basic concept, which I'll show you in a minute. And we really probed into that a bit deeper into session 3 to understand, does it serve the purpose, and what are the key elements that we should really be starting with before we expand out. So core session 1, the very first thing we wanted to do was establish a vision and mission. So as a team, all of the stakeholders who were involved contributed their ideas. We basically just wanted to understand, what's motivating us all to be here. And really, as a living lab, not just for this precinct, what are we trying to achieve, and what are those values that are really driving us? So we have a vision and mission there. And then into session 1. So you can see here, we were trying to basically start to map out that ecosystem around a precinct as the center. Basically, we ended up with this as a summary of those stakeholders. For each of these stakeholders, there was a link in this that would take you to a page kind of like this that would show you the opportunities and considerations addressed for each of these key stakeholders. So this is what we ended up with in session 1. And then we used this information in session 2 to then guide us to start to generate those ideas. And so again, this is the outcome of session 2, so it's a bit of a spoiler. I'm just using it to sort of demonstrate what we discussed. But at the end of session 2, these are the elements that they thought were necessary in the region. It's a lot, and it's certainly not something that's achievable straight off the bat. So we did look into, for each of these, what the key functions were and which of the opportunities from the earlier sessions that were addressed, and which of the stakeholders would benefit from this mostly. So all of this information, we looked at cold storage as well. I won't go through all of them because there are too many. This concierge concept as well is really that linking element of this precinct design that I mentioned before. So not only are we hoping to provide for those core facilities and infrastructure that's needed, but also, a communication stream that'll connect those stakeholders, connect them with knowledge, information, resources, and each other, opportunities to value add, for example. There are plenty of farmers that we've spoken to who have third-grade products that just sit on the ground and rot, for example, but they're just not sure, does anybody want to use this? How could they use this? And so, having a sort of a centerpiece to this, as insofar as a business concierge with, spaces to work and for educators to be able to come in and make that connection to industry also. So I am rushing through this because there is a lot to this, as you can see. But basically, as we then entered session 3, this is what we had. So we began with this basic model. And you can see there was a 3D version as well that we looked at. And we started to analyze that prototype and see if it would suit the needs. And what we determined was all of those other things were great, but in Coffs Harbour, we actually have a lot of markets that, maybe we could enhance those instead of adding it to this, the restaurants as well. So all of these things, in a future project would be great to integrate, but the core things here that we need to get started with is providing those facilities for processing, providing more cold storage, which is missing in the area, providing labs for the testing, which typically would go down to, up to Brisbane, and then providing facilities for logistics, including cross-stocking to help with those delays that they experienced, but also then providing a space for a charity organisation like Oz Harvest to be able to provide those services through. And so this is a very early idea of what the new design looks like, with some processing facilities here and so on. This is certainly a work in progress, so not something to take too seriously, but we're certainly moving through this now as well. We have had another session very recently also. So as I mentioned, this isn't just about, designing these solutions and so on, but it's also around how do we develop this cluster and increase collaboration and so on as well. We're fortunate enough, as James also mentioned, that we're connected with the Food and Agribusiness Network. So Nicole, the CEO, came down to Coffs, as well as Andy from Turbine, and sort of gave their perspective on how FAN's running and why these kinds of opportunities are really great for Coffs. We had a very good turnout there. We gave an update. You can see me with a very similar slide to what you've just seen from me before. I think we had about 100 or so people there as well, and really, really strong engagement. We also then launched our next couple of initiatives, 3 and 4. The community platform we're also working on, which is just in terms of, trying to provide more connections, certainly, but also trying to showcase all of the great producers and manufacturers in the region as well, and try to enhance that image. So this talent industry alignment in terms of how do we make sure that the skills and education that people in Coffs Harbour are achieving through TAFE or university or other training services, how do we make sure that actually aligns with the industry needs, which was something that we identified in this first project. There is a bit of misalignment there. And these kinds of things can also be run through those collaborative spaces in our precinct, for example, as well. And also this Coffs Food brand enhancement. So the brand has a lot of very good merit, and we're just trying to figure out, is there a way that we can utilize that to make more of a name and enhance what they do, the great things they do. So that's basically what I've just said there, and better wording probably, how do we leverage the provenance to attract a market that matches our quality and passion in that. So that's called Agrifood Living Lab. It's Coffs Agrifood Living Lab in a nutshell.